So there's this guy, let's call him Snoop. Now Snoop lives in Las Vegas, but one day he takes a trip to Dubai because he might open a business there. But then, suddenly, on his second day in Dubai, he gets a terrible pain in his stomach. And it hurts bad. It hurts so bad he can barely move. So he calls an ambulance and they take him to the hospital. And at the hospital, they determine it's pancreatitis. So they treat him, he starts recovering, and it looks like everything's gonna be fine. Until the day he's supposed to leave the hospital, 2 armed police officers show up to his little room and they tell him they're there to escort him back to his hotel, which is weird because he doesn't have his clothes or his shoes on yet. He's like, okay, I guess this is just Dubai. So he goes with them, but they don't take him to his hotel. They take him to the police station, and there they throw him in a room for a couple of hours, then a different room for an hour, then they lead him down a long corridor and they throw him in a detention center. And poor Snoop, he has absolutely no idea what's going on. So then they take him away to a second detention center, and at this point they've already confiscated his passport and like everything from him. But while he's in that second detention center, he finally gets another guy who's also being detained to talk to him. And Snoop's like, what the hell is going on? And that guy tells him that this is a place for people who commit drug-related crimes. And Snoop's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. He hadn't bought or like taken anything illegal while he was there. And at this point, he doesn't even know how long he's been detained because there's no windows and the lights are always on. And they haven't given him any food and they haven't given him any water. And he's in pain because they're withholding the medicine that he was prescribed for his pancreatitis. But then, finally, after 3 days, they let him go back to his hotel. But they keep his passport, so he can't leave the country and he can't fly back to the US. So there Snoop is, just chilling in his hotel, waiting to hear back from the police. And about 2 weeks go by, and they're giving him the runaround. And that's when he realizes he is never getting his passport back. He is stuck there. So he goes and gets an attorney. And luckily, the attorney is able to figure out what the hell is going on. So back when Snoop was at the hospital for his pancreatitis, the doctors had tested his urine. And when they tested it, they found traces of marijuana. But the thing is, Snoop wasn't lying. He never smoked in Dubai. He did, however, smoke like a month before, back in Las Vegas before he left. Which, that is perfectly legal in Las Vegas. But unfortunately, it stays in your system for about a month. And according to EAU law, just having marijuana in your system counts as possession, which is a crime. So now, Snoop has to wait around in Dubai for an indefinite amount of time while authorities make the decision of whether or not to throw him in jail for a year or two, which is the punishment for said crime. So Snoop just waits, and he waits, and 2 months go by. And while he's waiting, he's like hemorrhaging money. Hotel costs every night, legal fees. He has to break the lease back in his Las Vegas apartment because now he can't afford it. His pet birds back home die because he can't attend to them. His girlfriend back home leaves him. She doesn't know if he's ever coming back. And then, finally, after 2 months, after he spent around $50,000 on this, his lawyers are ultimately able to get his case dropped. And he gets his passport back, and he goes back home to the US, and I don't think he's ever going back to Dubai. So this happened 2 years ago, and since then, allegedly, the EAU has relaxed their laws on this, which is a good thing, because that's crazy. Shout out to Dubai. So one day, this woman is skydiving, and she's done this 1,000 times. But this time, when she goes to deploy her parachute, it doesn't open. No big deal, she'll just use her reserve chute. But then that doesn't open either. And that is when she starts panicking. So her name's Els, and Els loves skydiving. So much so that every weekend she'll leave her husband and kids at home and she'll spend that time jumping out of planes. Now Elle has a friend she skydives with sometimes, this guy, who we'll call Lover, because eventually Lover and Elle spend so much time together, they end up smashing. So every weekend, Els will leave her family, go skydiving, and smash with Lover. Now, unbeknownst to Els, Lover is also hooking up with this other woman, who we'll call Side Piece. Side Piece is also a skydiver, and she's way into Lover. Now, she knows Lover is seeing Els, and she doesn't like it. She wants Els out of the picture, so then Side Piece gets to work trying to make that happen. She writes an anonymous letter to Els' husband, tipping him off about the affair, but that doesn't work, and Side Piece ends up very frustrated. She anonymously calls Els at home and breathes heavily into the phone, trying to intimidate her. That doesn't work either, and Side Piece ends up even more frustrated. Here's the thing though, Els and Side Piece are actually friends. They go skydiving together all the time, and Els has no idea Side Piece is trying to ruin her fling with Lover. So Side Piece's frustration continues to build and build and build until one night, Side Piece and Lover go out to dinner. And when they get back to Lover's place, Els is there waiting. Like, hey, Lover, surprise, I'm here to hang out. So now Side Piece has to hang out with the both of them and pretend she's not jealous as shit. Now, I don't know exactly what was said or how this happened, but somehow they all three end up staying the night at Lover's place, with Els and Lover sleeping in Lover's bed, and Side Piece sleeping in a sleeping bag on Lover's living room floor. And so Side Piece, I imagine, is laying there on the living room floor, and all this frustration is built up. And finally, in that moment, she loses it. So she gets up, and she gets a pair of scissors, and she gets Els' skydiving gear, because Els had all her gear there. And she starts cutting things on Els' parachute. She removes the pilot chute, this little part here. She cuts off some very important straps, straps and drawstrings and like all kinds of stuff. Fast forward to 2 weeks later when Els and Lover and Side Piece are all scheduled to do a jump together with a larger group. And 4 of them plan on doing one of those formations that skydiving groups sometimes do. So they go up in the plane and they all jump out and they do the formation. And it's a little sloppy, Side Piece jumped late, whatever. So they do the formation and then they give the signal for everyone to deploy their parachute. And everyone does. But Els, her parachute doesn't open. And Els has been doing this a long time. She doesn't panic. She just goes to open her reserve chute. But then that doesn't open either. And that is when she starts panicking. She's scrambling to try and get the chute or the emergency chute to open, but nothing works, and Els free falls over 2 miles down to the ground. Meanwhile, down below, a woman is out in her yard, and suddenly she hears a crash. She looks around in some bushes, and she sees Els. And obviously, Els doesn't make it. Now, police, they start investigating all this. They take Els' parachute, they bring it to a parachute expert, and pretty quickly, parachute expert is like, someone tampered with this. And more importantly, he notices the pilot chute is missing. Then, for some reason, Side Piece goes to police and is like, hey, Els' gear wasn't sabotaged. I found the pilot chute, I guess, on the ground. Here's the thing, though. Police never told anyone the pilot chute was missing. And they're like, how'd you know the pilot chute was missing? Bitch, now you're a suspect. And after they investigate a little more, they find out about the love triangle between Side Piece, Els, and Lover. And that Side Piece had slept in the living room that night near Els' skydiving gear. So they bring her in for questioning more than once, and one of the times she doesn't show up because I guess she was trying to unalive herself, which police feel makes her look even more guilty. So they arrest her, she goes to trial, she's found guilty. Here's what she really looks like. She's sentenced to 30 years in prison, and she spends about 12.5 years in, and she got out last year. And all this happened in Belgium, so shout out to Belgium. One night, this woman, Kate, she's driving down the highway when boom, her car runs out of gas. So she pulls over on the side of the road in the shady part of town, and she has no money for gas. She doesn't know what she's gonna do. But then, this homeless man sees her. This guy, who we'll call Beardy. So Beardy approaches her, and he doesn't really have much, but he offers her his last $20 so that he can get her some gas and she can get home safely. And then Kate does get home safely, and she tells her boyfriend what happened. Her boyfriend is this guy, Mark. So the next day, Kate and Mark go back and they find Beardy and they repay him by bringing him food and some clothing. But then Kate and Mark get this idea, an idea that'll change their lives forever. They go and they set up a GoFundMe campaign for Beardy so that they can set up a trust for him and get him a home. And on this GoFundMe campaign, they tell the story of how Beardy had helped Kate with his last $20. Then the local news picks up the story starts to go viral, and the GoFundMe campaign blows up. And people love it, and they're moved, and they start donating like crazy. And suddenly Kate and Mark and Beardy, they're all doing interviews. And pretty soon, the GoFundMe campaign that they had started raises $10,000, $20,000, $100,000, eventually $400,000. So then Kate and Mark buy an RV for Beardy to move into, and they park it on their property where they live. All this is really turning out to be an incredible feel-good story. Until months go by, and one day a reporter at a local news station gets a tip, and the tip says that Beardy is back living on the streets again. So she goes to interview him, and she's like, where's all that money you made from the GoFundMe? And Beardy's like, I never really got it. So immediately, several high-profile attorneys in the area, they see this. So they reach out to him to help him figure out what happened to that $400,000 in GoFundMe money. And then he goes on record and says Kate and Mark only gave him about $75,000. And he says the rest of the money Kate and Mark had been using for personal expenses. They bought a new BMW, luxury vacations, handbags, spending it at casinos, and immediately everyone sees this and they're like, yeah, I believe it. Because Kate and Mark had been flaunting some of it on social media. Pictures of them going to Vegas, going to LA, going to the Grand Canyon, taking a helicopter ride. So Beardy and his lawyer file a lawsuit suing Kate and Mark for the rest of his money. So Kate and Mark see this and they immediately go into damage control. They go on a little press tour, they assure everyone like, oh, this is all just a big misunderstanding.
Have you spent $1 of that $400,000 on yourselves?
No.
But then, after he had time to really investigate this, Beardy's lawyer comes out and gives a statement, and he drops a bomb. He says that in his investigation, he found that all the rest of that GoFundMe money is gone. And that is when the county prosecutor gets involved. Because now you have a crime on your hands. So really quickly, police get a search warrant, and they search Kate and Mark's home, and they seize a bunch of their devices. And instead of sticking together, Kate and Mark start pointing fingers at each other. And Kate decides that she's secretly gonna record Mark so that she can blame all this on him. And in this recording, he ends up outlining the whole crime.
You know how much money you spent? Oh, just off the top of my head?
Go.
20,000 BMW, 5,000 Disney, 10,000 in bags.
So this recording that was supposed to blame him ends up making both of them look guilty as fuck. And around this time, police start combing through Kate and Mark's devices that they had seized. And they find that months before, after Kate and Mark had first met Beardy, Kate had sent a text to her friend admitting that the whole story is fake. Obviously, Beardy is a real guy, and he really was homeless. But he never gave Kate his last $20 for gas. That was all made up. And they made all that up so that people would feel sorry for him and think he's a good person and donate to the GoFundMe. So it was all a scam. And since that story was never true, that means Beardy was in on the scam too. So they arrest all three of them. Here's Kate's mugshot, here's Mark's mugshot, and here's Beardy's mugshot. Kate is sentenced to 3 years in prison, Mark gets 5 years, and Beardy gets 3 years probation, and they all have to pay a bunch of the money back. So shout out to Philadelphia and New Jersey.